first of all, before I begin this, I just want to say thank you. I am so excited to be here. Thank you all for showing up. And I just put this together last night so we can keep it super casual. If you have questions, if you want to wait or put them in the chat, that would be great because I really want to spend more time. We can cruise through this and then we can spend as much time as you want addressing questions. I also, if you're interested, will send this to you, email this to you. If you want to put your email in, that's great too. And then what I'm also hoping to do is I just want to show you a few resources for your own investigation. So just share my screen and show you where to find some more information if this is a topic that you're curious about and you want to dig into more. So with that, I'm Christy Thiel. I'm a master nutrition therapist, and I was also in the hemp industry and very fascinated with the endocannabinoid system, which led me to working with some chemists and some pharmacists. And it was a pharmacist that gave me my first microdosing, and it really had a subtle but profound impact on me. And so I actually got into microdosing kind of by accident because when I learn about something, I really want to educate about it because then it seems to stick in my head a little bit more. And so I started presenting to other practitioners and friends and small practitioner groups. And I did not bring this into my practice, but people started referring to me and it started to grow, and it grew because when people would sit and tell me about their results with microdosing, it was like they were reading from a book. Like everything I was reading they were saying, but they weren't reading the books, they were just experiencing it. And then they'd also come in and say, I'm off sugar, I've started exercising, I'm sleeping more, I'm not eating the same foods, I can't put them in my body. And it really hit me, like as a nutritionist, it's a really hard job because it's hard for people to change, and food is probably one of the biggest addictions we have. And it just started to become so obvious that when we feel better, we do better. And so Soulful Bloom has been through 3 brandings. First we were Mycelium, then we were Dotly, and then now we are Soulful Bloom, and we are a 501c3 nonprofit. And I'll go into what that means a little bit later, but we are protected by the First Amendment, and it is your spiritual and constitutional right to be able to access medicine if it helps harm yourself in any way, including thoughts, less and or others. So what is microdosing? I've got to move this little thing over here. So we used to call microdosing sub-perceptual, but James Fadiman, sort of the father of microdosing, decided he'd update the sub-perceptual to sub-hallucinogenic, which means you don't hallucinate. But sub-perceptual can be a little bit confusing because you're like, well, if it's sub-perceptual, should I feel it or should I not feel it? Technically, you just want to bump up against it. And that means that you can feel more activated, which means you can do all the things that you do better because you're literally rewiring the brain and coming into more agency. So the substances that are the most common to microdose are psilocybin, LSD, but I also encourage people to microdose their thoughts and or other things that tend to get in the way of ourselves living our best lives. There's usually protocols, ranges, and things like that, which we'll get into in the next slide. But the purpose is really to kind of clear the programs that have kept us stuck. So the definition and dosage is sub-perceptual or sub-hallucinogenic or just feeling more activated. And the amount that people typically microdose with in a capsule form is 100 to 500 milligrams. And this is dependent on the amount of stacked stressors that people have had in their lifetime, PTSD, head injuries, pharmaceuticals, all sorts of things affect the way that psilocybin can, your gut health, whether you've had Lyme or not. So in the beginning, it takes a while, maybe a week to a month, to kind of figure out the ideal protocol. But once you're in that flow, you kind of notice it a little bit, especially when you notice that the triggers, the big triggers, aren't so triggering, and that you have this adaptability throughout the day that usually wasn't there before. So a little history and background. Obviously, psilocybin is not new. People have been having mystical experiences with psilocybin for centuries. And one of the reasons that we can uphold plant medicine as a nonprofit and as an entheogen church, which an entheogen just means it's something that helps you recognize the God within, which of course we all have. And so one of the reasons that we can be an entheogen church is because of the history of psilocybin. And there's actually more documented experiences of people having mystical experiences on plant medicine than in some organized religions. Both are good. Sometimes a blend can really bring the best out of both worlds. And so then we had a big, we were doing a lot of research through the 1950s and 70s. Obviously, Johns Hopkins, Stanford, Harvard, a lot of the universities were leading with some very incredible research. But then it went into the recreational side. That got people concerned. That's when we had the prohibition, and we got a lot of the stigma of, oh, if you do this, you're going to jump off a building, you're going to think you're going to fly, and all these things. Now that can happen, but research has showed that a lot of times when people are having really bad hallucinations, it's usually mixed with other drugs like alcohol and things like that. But in a good setting with intention, that these medicines can be very powerful. And so now we are having a re-emergence of that understanding and really going full force with the academics. We're bringing it more into the therapeutic side, and the intentional use is sort of trending towards outdoing the recreational side of it, which I am in full favor of. All right, so there are lots of magic mushrooms out there. There's over 200 species of them. And the way that psilocybin works is if you take the raw mushroom, it actually has to get converted in your liver, and it turns to something called psilocin. And there are synthetic forms of psilocin and natural forms of psilocin. And so when you do a macro dose, which means you're going into a full journey, that usually lasts about 4 to 6 hours. And even though just a micro amount of psilocin or psilocybin, it's still in your system for about 4 to 6 hours, but you kind of forget it's there, and then you notice it, something might come through, a better feeling, less depression, less anxiety, just laugh. It's easier to talk to people, but you're not feeling it. It's just that like little bump up against it where you're like, I wonder if that's the microdosing. It's just easier today than normal. And psilocybin is non-addictive, which is also why it's really beneficial to use when people are coming out of alcoholism, nicotine abuse, even sugar. They're using it for eating disorders because it's so well tolerated and very safe. The safety profile is unsurpassed, and I'll show you where I'm getting that information. So now we have the neuroplasticity receptors in the psychedelic self. So why and where is psilocybin working? So psilocybin, compared to antidepressants, a lot of them work on the HT2A receptor, the serotonin 2,1A receptor. So most pharmaceuticals are serotonin 1A, and psilocybin is 2A. And this is important because a lot of people are on medications, and this supports that there's not adverse interactions. And so the serotonin 2A receptor is throughout the frontal cortex, which is our executive function. Psilocybin increases neuroplasticity in brain-derived neurotropic factor upregulation. That just means it makes the left and right hemispheres of your brain interact, and then you hold on to that information. It's not just, eventually when you get off of the mushrooms or off of the microdosing, that it still sticks. It's not going to go away. It rebuilds this neuroplasticity, but it's not dependent on it, because when you stop, you're going to maintain that neuroplasticity and neuroflexibility. And it works throughout something called the default mode network. We'll go into that in a lot more detail. And it definitely has good effects on your mood, creativity, anxiety, cognition, sleep, pain. New areas of research are head injuries, strokes, just wonderful, wonderful information coming out. So this is one of my favorite topics, is default mode network. And this is what happens when you're just kind of in thought. You're just thinking, and we've rewired the brain kind of in the first 7 years of life, when we're learning how to get approval and acceptance and navigate our environment, our family, our parents, school. So some of these default mode networks are hardwired in, and sometimes they're hardwired in for survival. So they've been with us for a really long time. This is how you think about yourself. These are the beliefs and the concepts that get us stuck, which means we don't think that we can get a new job or change our diet or start a new habit, or we just kind of put things on repeat. They just seem to keep coming to us. So this is the default mode network. It is a network of brain regions that are active when a person is at rest, not focused on the external environment, and engaged in internal mental processes like self-reflection, mind wandering, or thinking about the past and the future. I'll never change. This never works for me. Some of those things where the average person would be like, yes, you can. This is happening. Just change how you think. This is the default mode network that people are trying to change. So the default mode network through psilocybin tends to lead towards feelings of interconnectedness, and that we're less focused on that self-serving side of us. It increases brain connectivity, so it disrupts those rigid default mode patterns, enhancing communication between those brain regions. And this is where people report better problem-solving skills, creativity, and emotional flexibility, which is really interesting, because when they started to figure out this whole microdosing thing, I should have mentioned this in the history, the only thing they thought that microdosing would help with would be problem-solving skills and increased creativity because of the neuroplasticity. But because they did it through a means of asking for volunteers, and all the volunteers were responsible for doing is self-reporting, this is actually why we have all these robust studies going on, because people were reporting treatment-resistant depression, gone, addictions, violent behavior, like countless things. And so, and really cool thing about having volunteers do the self-reporting instead of these double-blind placebo-controlled studies is because A, they let women in, and B, all they said is you have to do is self-reporting. So you could volunteer if you were depressed, addicted, anxious, had head injuries, autistic, the whole spectrum. And this is why we know as much as we do about microdosing, because they didn't put it under a specific lens. They just let people self-report. So back to default mode network, alleviation of mental health symptoms. So this really, like, you can't feel good and hate yourself. And this is what really is so profound about microdosing, is that all that serotonin, even in a micro amount, is really connecting that heart and that brain and that gut axis to upregulate to our original operating system, which is love and safety and peace. But a lot of times, and Levita is the one who taught me this, is that the love and the peace doesn't leave us, we leave it. So we get back to this original operating system, which is safety and peace. And a lot of people don't feel safe in their bodies. So this is very, very powerful, even a micro amount. So enhanced neuroplasticity, we all need that. It really helps, even they're seen in brain scans, with halting early signs of dementia. And this is where the strokes come in. And it's also a strong anti-inflammatory for the brain too, which is probably why it's working more on the depression than just the serotonin. And then of course the mystical experiences, because when you feel safe in your body and you're not harming yourself or others, it becomes a mystical experience. And that is really important to remember, is that we are here to experience love, and not just hard work all the time. So back to clinical and anecdotal benefits. So when James Fadiman did his first citizen scientist volunteer experiment with microdosing, they were blown away by the consistency of these sort of benefits coming up. So feeling better, better mood, reduction in anxiety and depression, better focus, memory, obviously better emotional regulation, and chronic pain. And I'm going to show you a really good website where you can find a lot of the chronic pain studies that are coming out, because serotonin, which is upregulated with microdosing, regulates several things. One of them is inflammation. And so when we have less inflammation and also less depression, a lot of this can support the pain response. And sleep, because serotonin can convert to melatonin, and when people feel better and they're less stressed and their cortisol isn't like peaking all day long, you can sleep better. So sleep is actually a benefit that I've been witnessing, that a lot of our members, they just use it as for sleep, and they're tracking their sleep. And so I mean, it's really happening. They're getting deeper and deeper sleep with and so they're not microdosing during the day. They're just microdosing at night. All right. Researchers at Washington University School of Medicine gave psilocybin to participants in a study before sending them to a functional MRI. And this is what they found. Psilocybin, in contrast to any other drug they've tested, has the massive effect on the whole brain. So what they're saying, compared to any other drug, that psilocybin drives neuroplasticity, which obviously decreases the default mode network and brings us back to that original operating system, so that we aren't so stressed out all the time. And sometimes, those, in my opinion, I think stress is the biggest anti-nutrient, and it's really hard to heal when we have high cortisol, and it's really hard to heal when people hate themselves. And, sometimes it's the most unexpected people that really hate themselves. And so this is why I work a lot with practitioners, because your patients and clients might be doing all the right things, but they're just stuck in that default mode of self-destruction. And so when they feel better and they do better, it helps all the things that you're helping with stick a little bit better. So here is a brain. Here's someone given a placebo And so this is what on the placebo, what you're seeing is default mode. And so these are your predictable behaviors. Oh, I knew you were going to say that. Oh, you're so predictable. Like it's all those things where you just see it coming, where you just know how you're going to act versus on psilocybin. Now, this is psilocybin after a big journey. So this is going to take longer with microdosing, but with a big journey, you're hitting it hard. You're like 4 to 6 hours, boom, right? That's a lot to prepare for some people. It's a lot to integrate. So with microdosing is more stabilizing versus a heavy hitter. So you're going to have the same results, but it's going to be over a few months, maybe 3 to 12 months. But when you stop microdosing, you feel the same on the medicine as off. So Paul Austin is the founder of Third Wave, and X, which used to be Twitter. They put a lot of the science of psilocybin on there. And so this is one of his quotes: microdosing psychedelics isn't woo. It's neuroplasticity amplified, neurogenesis initiated, and agency reclaimed. And I love this because that's so simple. And that's exactly the experience that I see and feel consistently, professionally and personally. And it's because it puts those hemispheres together. It activates that executive function. It increases serotonin, and it makes the brain, the heart, the gut, the immune system all sort of become more cohesive in that common language. Again, mood, reduction in anxiety and depression, clarity and focus. Emotional regulation, this is interesting because they did a PubMed study and they gave men who are domestically violent either psilocybin or LSD. And they started to emotionally regulate every single one of them, and they stopped the domestic violence. And I was sharing that slide with a good friend of mine who came to me, and she was asking if microdosing would help her, but she didn't have any stress, and she was like one of those perfect people that didn't have any problems. And so she had been microdosing for a while, and I just showed her this slide, and she said, Christy, this is incredible because I was the emotional abuser in my family. I would come home and I would pick fights with my kids. I was impatient with my husband, and there's no way that she was ever going to catch that with, her high performance life and that sort of thing. And I thought that was amazing. And so when you hear that people don't have breakthroughs on microdosing, only big journeys, it's not true. People have really profound breakthroughs on microdosing. It might take a little bit longer because it's stabilizing versus breaking through, but these are the kind of experiences that people have. And then she told me that her kids have told her that she's never hugged and kissed them as much as she has since, when she was explaining this to me, which was really profound because we know that if our parents are our triggers, that we're usually going to carry that along in life and somehow mirror that in self-acceptance or confidence and those sort of things. So her healing herself is going to have a massive ripple effect, especially with her family. It can increase intimacy, and again, another emerging area is eating disorders, and that's coming from Johns Hopkins University. All right. Oh, yes. So here is a study for us. This is Lexapro. And so at this, they were saying that the psilocybin produces rapid and persistent antidepressant effects in the major depressive disorder. So this is really important if your patients or clients don't want to go on the SSRIs because it could affect their gut. It could make them feel worse before they get better. It could take weeks for them to actually start to feel better. But with psilocybin, you can feel really good pretty fast as soon as you kind of hit the right protocol that works for you, but there aren't side effects. You're not going to feel suicidal or have gut issues, or you're not going to have as many gut issues. Some people have some gut issues. We can address that. But this is a very safe way to deal or address or support people with major depressive disorder. And there's a lot of studies going on right now, and I can show you some of those places where the studies, if you're interested in doing a study, where you can find those. But this is really cool. Autism is also a really interesting area that psilocybin is supporting. And if you go to MAPS, maps.org, which is a gold standard for psychedelic research, they have some really good books on autism and psychedelics. And one of the reasons it works so well for the autistic brain is because psilocybin will slow down time for them, and then it helps them focus. And so one of our coaches is high functioning Asperger's, and he swears by this, and he teaches violin, and he has said, like, I have such an unfair advantage with learning music on psilocybin, but he's also very brilliant, but it slows down time for the very hyperactive brain because focusing is more challenging for them. So here we go. Microdosing is medicine. So I like this because what we're finding, and probably all of us are in a very similar boat around this, that the traditional systems are not enough. The pharmaceuticals and the standard therapies often miss the root cause, leaving individuals feeling stuck, misunderstood, or numbed. Disconnection is the epidemic. People are increasingly disconnected from themselves, their purpose, and one another, leading to emotional, spiritual, and relational breakdown. Again, it's hard to heal when you go home and beat yourself up or you hate other people. Both are not going to contribute to healing. Demands for new models. There's a rise in global demand for safe, legal, and spiritually integrated approaches to healing. And so this is why I'm really passionate about microdosing, is because I think it's one of those missing links with all the good things that people are already doing, so the neuroplasticity sticks, but that people can actually drop into their bodies, feel safe in their bodies, and feel, and it's safe to love again, including ourselves. So what we're finding, these findings indicate that psilocybin enhances that brain integration, diminishes the default mode network. It helps with depression, it helps with PTSD, and it helps also with prevention. And Paul Stamets does a lot of self-reporting. He has his own self-reporting platform, and he even says that when people are consistent with microdosing, that their risk of falling can go down by 40%, is what he's seen in 55 plus, because it increases agility too. So you're getting this whole body reactivation. So all this good stuff, what about the risks, the cautions, and the contraindications? So there aren't contraindications with your traditional SSRIs because of the serotonin 1A versus the 2A with psilocybin. But with these people, a lot of times their receptors are more blocked and blunted, and they've also suppressed their emotions for so long. So the people that I've worked with that are on these or have been on them, especially for a long time, they almost always need more. And so an average person may need 100 to 200. They need more like 300 to 500, and they may feel better if they take it twice a day. So if someone is bipolar, it's not recommended. What they're finding in the research is that it's not beneficial on the manic phase. It can be beneficial on the depressed phase, but it's much better to work with a therapist. and I would only refer to a therapist if someone was bipolar. Now, setting, and intention, this is always talked about when you go into big medicine. You don't want to be on a journey and be in a threatening environment, because you're probably not going to have a good experience. You're going to be scared. You might see things that are even scarier. And so even with microdosing, this is important too. You want to be able to have a good mindset, and you want to be intentional about why you're taking the medicine, because this is something that we call spiritual epigenetics, that we know that stress and negativity and toxins can affect the expression of our cells, but so can being intentional in a good way, so can feeling awe and joy. And so even with microdosing, because you're creating a hyperplastic state, we want to be very intentional about what kind of influences and frequencies we're putting throughout our system. A lot of people forget that, and they just pop their capsule, and it still works. It just works better with intention. And of course, it's not a cure-all or a substitute for therapy. I think it works incredibly well with therapy. I do therapy. I can't imagine not doing therapy. And I definitely have seen everything work better with the more neuroplastic state, and just feeling that love and safety and just more contentment and coherence within my own beingness. And so we'll go here at the end. This is a good list by James Fadiman that shows all the medicines, supplements, etc., that go hand in hand. They don't have adverse effects. All right, so legal landscape, especially in Colorado, it is changing a lot. We have our first certified wellness center, and Dora is certifying practitioners so that they become a state recognized psychedelic assisted therapist. So this is incredibly encouraging, and it won't work for everyone. And so there will be people that are really drawn to the clinical experience, and that is wonderful. But it will also leave some therapists feeling like they can't do the work the way that they're used to doing, which may include going out in nature, or combining medicines, or having sage. There's so many things that the indigenous people have taught us about medicine and ceremony and ritual and preparation. And my concern is that some of this is not going to be honored in the clinical setting. So as a 501c3, we can work with both certified therapists and the therapists that have been sort of underground for the last 20 and 30 years, and protect them from getting in trouble. So both systems are going to be hopefully hold the highest standards. The certifications, the wellness centers are going to be amazing. But then we're going to see more and more of these 501c3s for people that need to bring in a little bit more of the indigenous culture, a blending, something that is, a hybrid of the ancient wisdom and the newest science. Psilocybin is still Schedule 1 in most places. And in Colorado, it is still decriminalized, which means you can have, take, grow, and transport it. You just can't pay for it. And in that use, it's considered personal use. So you can pay for a pen or coaching or a sticker, and someone will give you their personal use of mushrooms. And so there's going to be more clinical trials and things like this, but the only way to be federally safe is to have a 501c3, which means you have to be using this in a spiritual way. And then the clinical ways are going to be expanding too, which are really good. All right, so why now? Why is this a reemergence happening? And one of the reasons it's happening is because we have countless people. What is the newest statistics? Like 1 in 5 people, 1 in 4 people have major depression, and depression is now one of the leading disabilities in people's lives. So it's becoming, it's a big deal. And so we're going to see probably MDMA and psilocybin be used as breakthrough therapies. Obviously, MDMA did not get passed, but it might get passed, and we're definitely going to see rescheduling happening by 2027. And so another reason why the churches are really nice is because you don't have to charge so much money for these services. And so when people can't afford, the prices that the wellness centers are going to charge, the churches might be able to offer a little bit more support. But what we're seeing clinically is that this is psychedelics are confirming that they're really working. Like this is not woo-woo science. This is real science. It is working. It's sticking, and it doesn't take that long to have big shifts. If you do a big journey, maybe 3. If you're microdosing, maybe 3 to 12 months. And then a lot of people will just stop using the medicine. And so in 2024, there was a meta-analysis and 70% drop in depressive symptoms. That's gigantic. What if 70% of the United States became less depressed? Imagine how we would be in community. And then the public support of psychedelics rose from 39% in 2019 to 62% in 2024. So people are catching on. Of course, what we're going to have to deal with is safety and consistency and integrity within this industry, because there will obviously be the big money grab in the synthetics and those sort of infiltrations into this space also. So one of the things I'm really passionate about with the microdosing is that it can really improve people's spiritual lives, because it's very hard for some people to feel spiritual, to feel love, to love others, when that default mode has them feeling fragmented and broken and scattered, and they feel bad about themselves and what they can't do all the time. So again, disconnection is the epidemic, and we really want to bring more community with the microdosing, with the medicine, with the therapist, and just bring more and more people together, whether they do or do not need the medicine, at least being in more community and holding standards and integrity and consistency with the medicine. And lots of referrals too. So integration and best practices. When people start microdosing or preparing for a macro journey, and by the way, I don't do the macro journeys. We have a clinical therapist that is our clinical director, and she does our sacred journeys. And the reason it's so nice is because her and her husband can go to people's homes. They can really get to know them better. They can take it out of just therapy and bring in a lot of this spirituality. And so I do the microdosing. We have several other coaches that do microdosing, and then we have an RN, a pharmacist, and our clinical directors that do some of the macros. So no matter if it's macro or micro, journaling, tracking, reflection, these are really, really important practices for overriding the default mode. So it's not just the medicine doing the work, but it's also our integration, our understanding, our adaptability to it, our stability with it, and just taking that time to honor, like, wow, oh my gosh, I was nice to that person that I don't even like, and I don't even know. I just found myself smiling at them, or not getting so impatient in traffic, or not going home and just being like, how am I going to get through the night without drinking a bottle of wine and all the ways that we self-medicate, it just brings in more pause and more clarity and coherence, no matter when the biggest trigger is in the day. So when people start microdosing, a lot of times they feel better pretty quickly, and so they think, oh, I should stop. But what happens is they felt better because of the anti-inflammatory benefits and the serotonin, but they stop too soon, and there's no right or wrong, and that those tendencies have come back because the neuroplasticity hasn't kicked in. So the consistency is for the neuroplasticity to override the default mode. And so that overriding is really important, not just feeling better. And so when you combine any sort of psychedelic medicine, it's also important to realize that there are many other things that are neuroplastic and that will support the environment that the medicine is going in, which is nutrition, movement, meditation, being in community, and just getting out in nature. And obviously, gratitude is huge because gratitude is a great neuroplastic practice. You can't be resentful and grateful at the same time. And so you add gratitude, a healthier lifestyle, and microdosing, and these things are going to help people feel big shifts. So functional medicine, this is why I love working with therapists and functional medicine practitioners, because we can get to root causes a little bit easier together. So we get out of that survival brain, because people can be doing all the right things, but if they're stuck in that survival brain and that high cortisol, they're going to be in those feedback loops, and all the good things that you are providing to them are just going to take longer for them to work. And the nervous system regulation, again, it's hard to heal and hate, whether it's yourself or your neighbor or just, what's going on. It's easier to heal in peace. And then again, we get the gut brain immune axis. Stress is the biggest anti-nutrient. So if we feel less stress, we're going to have less inflammation. And all psychedelics prefer a clean body. And it's only ayahuasca that really says that a dieta, a preparation for the ceremony is necessary. And I don't find that that is true at all. I feel like whether it's ketamine or LSD or MDMA or mushrooms, all medicine will do better in a cleaner, less inflamed body, because the body has to be the one that is also experiencing it. And soul as a missing piece. So spiritual epigenetics, like obviously we know that our body, our thoughts, our cells hear everything we think. And so when we come more alive and in tune, our thoughts are tuning forks, then the better all this medicine, all the therapies, everything that people are doing to heal, it's going to work better. So this is one of my areas that I'm really, really diving into, is soul as this signal. So I'll just read this, and we're almost done. At Soulful Bloom, we believe the soul is not separate from science. It is the signal behind the system. Microdosing, when done in sacred relationship, activates more neurotransmitters. It awakens dormant codes of coherence, clarity, and compassion. And our members report more than just improved mood. They might come to feel better, but they feel like they get themselves back. And this is encoded in us. We know who we are. It's just the programs and the fragmentation that keep us scattered and disconnected. But we all can come back to ourselves. And so many people are trying. And sometimes microdosing and psychedelics can just be a missing link. And that is it. I love talking about this. Thank you for listening. I'm excited to hear your questions. And just remember, what is the signal behind your healing? How are you talking to yourself? What are those subclinical, under the radar thoughts and feelings and environments that we put ourselves in that might make healing more difficult? And I definitely believe that we can make consciousness mainstream, especially as we see more and more psychedelics come online and partner with people like all of you. We're going to be able to make a lot more movement and give this a lot more clarity and acceptance in our world, because I think we need it. And I did get deplatformed not too long ago. So I'm working on a new website, but you can still go to soulfulbloom.com. We're going to have a new website very, very soon. And for us to be able to share medicine, you just need to become a member, and then you are protected and I'm protected. And it's pretty simple after that. But that will be coming soon, and I can let Tanya know when our new website is live. If you want to become a member, you are more than welcome.